Hello and welcome to the Sexient Being Sessions. I am Alix Pruett, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach and reality guide. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to transform their old patterns, pain, and beliefs so they can create thriving relationships that are deeply connected, playful, and fulfilling within themselves and with others. Today, I'm joined by the stunning Rachelrose. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I am Rachelrose. I am both a psychologist and a life coach, and I work primarily with women who have PTSD or have been through trauma of any kind. And I help them work with their new uh, being so that they can live a peaceful existence with the PTSD and trauma that's going on in their lives and not have it rule over them, but they rule over it.
Wonderful. All right, our topic today is under pressure. That's literally plays through my head ever since
Oh,
we started
yes, I've
talking
been
about
doing
this
that.
topic.
I've been doing that all week.
um, so you are the one who picked this topic, so I'm going to let you kind of take the lead on that and what was coming up for you that brought up this topic as being relevant and something to take a look at.
Yeah. So, I've mentioned that I work with PTSD, and there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. It's an interesting pressure when it comes to PTSD because you can put someone with, PTSD or CPTSD and strand them on an island, and they'll probably figure it out and be fine.
Mhm.
But if you tell them to, or if you give them a tiny obstacle like a parking ticket or uh, some technological issue on their computer, or they can't find their left sock, it could, that pressure could freak them out. And I speak from personal
So
experience as well.
So like
So
that additional feeling of like pressure about some outside circumstance that
yes,
compiling and then sending everything kind of spiraling out of control.
yeah, coming from the most unlikely of places. And my mentor, he said, pressure can it's he quoted someone, I don't remember who it was, but pressure can either burst pipes or create diamonds.
Mhm.
It's not a bad thing. We want pressure because it gives us the opportunity to create diamonds. So we have to find a balance within pressure, like figure out how to make it work for us.
Yeah.
Because it has both positive and negative effects on our mental health. If we face moderate levels of stress or pressure, stress is more internal, pressure being external. It can motivate us to take action or achieve our goals. It can help us stay focused or energized, and it can help us, or it can provide a sense of challenge or accomplishment to a scenario.
Mhm.
However, when we experience too much pressure, we can have, the more negative effects on our mental health. This can lead to, feelings of anxiety, overwhelm, or burnout. And it can also impact our physical health. So, this will look like disturbed sleep patterns, increasing our risk of developing, chronic health conditions, and it weakens our immune system. It could also lead to like compulsion, like compulsive habits that may or may not be good for us,
Mhm.
in excess. So, it's important to learn how to manage pressure effectively to promote good mental health. It's not about not having any at all, it's a
Yeah.
balance. So, this can include strategies like practicing mindfulness or breath work or seeking out social support too, seeking out support from other people, setting realistic goals as well, and engaging in self care activities, like exercising, relaxing, hobbies, yoga. Um, all of this is to learn to cope with the pressures in a healthy way that can help us build resilience. This reduces stress and it maintains a good level of mental health within yourself. So it's, pressure, obviously, like just the physics of it, it can feel like a building is crushing you.
Hmm.
Um, when, more negative pressures arise. So, how we respond to pressure dictates how happy we will be in life. And how we respond in these moments is determined how well we have learned over time with practice to implement the things that can lead to good mental health and support. That includes, what I teach in my program and working with professionals who help you through, the PTSD, in which I'm speaking on specifically, um, in regards to pressures.
Well, and so I think if you want to clarify just for anyone listening, because like I keep getting the spaces of like that internal stress and
Hmm.
external pressure from the
Yeah.
world a little muddled, is that the pressure Rachel Rose is talking about is those things that come from the world outside of us.
Yes.
Um, that can be your job deciding they're going to put on a new project, right?
Hmm.
And that they decided they want you to lead it or like take a chunk of responsibility for this project.
Hmm.
And when you start compiling that with like, oh, now like I'm a parent and I need to handle all these responsibilities, and
Hmm.
um, now I lost my sock and I need to find that because for some reason it's my only sock I have that can fulfill my need right now, right?
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
um,
Exactly.
when you
Hmm.
start compiling on all those things, it creates that external force, or it can be
Hmm.
those responsibilities we feel coming in from that external world. And then stress is more of that internal process of how we're coping and dealing
Yeah.
through those spaces, or how that can feel overwhelming internally.
Yeah.
Um, but I know like I tend to like they're to me they're very, very linked because I know um like so when we started talking about this as a idea for this space, I was like, okay, well like what do I think of when I think of pressure coming from the outside world? And I was like, okay, well peer pressure, right?
Hmm.
Like basics back to like high school. And I remember in high school, like I didn't actually fall into peer pressure a whole lot. I would actually have more of an opposite response, like where people would be like, "Oh, Alex should do this." And this specifically was like everybody was sitting around smoking pot, right?
Hmm.
And it'd be going around the circle, and I'd be sitting there, and I'd be like contemplating, being like, maybe I want to do that today, because I didn't engage in that often,
Hmm.
but it never failed. Somebody would always tell or end up saying that I should do that thing. And I would go, nope, I'm not doing that now. And I would completely just not do it. And I wouldn't take on this weight that it was something I needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And that it didn't lead to this internal stress or feeling like I was carrying a lot of weight for what other people thought I should do. At the same time, there were other instances, let's say, jump forward 10 years, where I was in relationships or like longer term relationships that
Hmm.
were not healthy at those times.
Yeah.
But my partner wanting to have sex. And for whatever reason, it was a no in my body. But the more I would be honest about where I was, granted, I didn't like him and I did not have the communication for where we like at that juncture in life to figure out the deeper rooted things going on. Um, but in that, it came to a point where the more I said no, the more it would go into him pushing and fighting for that thing, So then I would start feeling that pressure and I'd just be like, fine, I'm going to give you what you want, right?
Mhm.
Completely not listening to my own body's no in that or my own body's wisdom to avoid the fight and conflict that
Mhm.
came with that. Um, and I noticed even after that point, like when I would have partners specifically come up to me and like say something they wanted or needed, it led to me saying yes a lot more of the time to avoid the fight
Mhm.
type thing. And that was a compiled narrative that ended up happening over a lifetime as well. But it's two of those similar sorts of things that are coming from outside forces where one was an easy no and one was not. And so there's that internal stress and like how much am I going to have to deal with,
Mhm.
right? And especially for me in avoiding conflict, um, and not going into full on arguments and like where I'm having a partner like I mean it was abusive relationships, right?
Mhm.
But receiving like abuse in ways or then begging from a partner to do this thing, um, it it was a shift in that dynamic for how it felt in my system and how much pressure I actually felt from it. Does that make sense?
Oh, completely. Yeah, because I mean, it's like, either direction you go in with pressure, like, let's
Hmm.
say there's the yes and the no, there's gonna be more pressure and more stresses involved in either side.
Yeah.
So, like you mentioned in high school, um, it sounded like, stepping up as a leader in certain situations, that people were appointing onto you and you chose not to,
Hmm.
and you said no. Um, there's pressures in that no, just, well, and stresses, pressure and stress in that no. Um, so it's not just, you say the word and then it's gone.
Hmm.
Just like what you were saying with your yes in your past relationships, that yes created a different pressure and different stresses even
Hmm.
after doing that.
Well, and oh, go ahead.
And so, yeah.
Oh, I was
No,
just
no,
gonna
go for
say
it.
like there's a piece of it for me where
Mhm.
that no can continue to carry weight,
Mhm.
right? Or it doesn't have to. And same with the yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's when I went through my bad burnout in my corporate job a couple of years ago, that's I had found I was multitasking a lot. So I had set a goal for myself of like, nope, I'm just going to focus on like the highest priority thing for that
Mhm.
day. I was doing a really good job of doing that. I would constantly have people popping in my office being like, "Oh, can you also do this thing? Can you get this other task out? This also needs to be a priority." And I was like, "Nope, this is my set of priorities for today." Right?
Yeah.
But at the end of that day, in the last like 5 minutes, I had that realization of like, oh, I have 5 minutes left. I just have to finish putting together this paperwork packet. And then I don't even have to think about this. Literally,
Mhm.
when that like moment of release happened in my system, um, my heart went into racing at 160 to 180 beats a minute. I got lightheaded, dizzy, and I had to sit down. I've
Mhm.
had that come up before, um, but it's usually been when I drink alcohol, and that is one reason I do not drink. Also, probably a strong indication that it's a letdown of stress in my system and what's been building. But I realized even in all those no's, I was still carrying a weight of responsibility in myself.
Mhm.
And that had built up to be that pressure and stress, and now my body getting the chance to relax was like, "Oh, now you're gonna feel it all."
Mhm.
And that led to me actually taking a step to take more time off of work and have more of that space so I could learn how to balance these things. And ultimately for me that meant I ended up leaving that job
Yeah. Yeah.
because I couldn't create the healthy boundaries in myself without overtaking the responsibility and the way it felt in my system.
Yeah.
So,
And that's important to note as well, is paying attention to how pressures feel in your system.
mhm,
It's like, like the, literal version of pressure, gases and whatnots, um, in the behavior of the gases. We have to be our own pressure valve or gauge so that we can see on that gauge where we are, so that we can allow it to play a role in our daily lives, but we're in control of it. And understanding how pressure helps us make sense of the world around us, and to make an informed decision through that gauge just is what I feel like you were saying in that scenario that you were explaining.
yeah, and I that that pressure I was feeling in my system, like, it was immensely uncomfortable. I mean,
Hmm.
there was also pressure in deciding to step away from that job, right? There was a lot of perceived safety and security
Hmm.
within that space as well, but
Hmm.
with everything else I had on my plate for things I had taken on as responsibilities solely within myself, um, that it just wasn't possible. Like I had taken on way too much for me. And I was able to sustain that for years, maybe even decades, right?
Yeah.
But it hit a point where I just couldn't do that anymore. And it led to really severe burnout. And it was showing up not only in feeling stressed and immensely exhausted, also at the same time not being able to sleep, but it started showing up as my heart racing, this constant tension and holding in my
Hmm.
body to where I was having chronic pain flare ups with my low back and
Yeah.
shoulders and stuff like that, and neck tension
Hmm.
and stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit terrifying how powerful the brain really is in somaticizing into physical health conditions and weakening your immune system.
Yeah.
Like, pressure has the ability to create cancer physically in the body
Mhm.
if we don't, use it effectively within ourselves and our being and who we are.
Well, and that was one of the things is in me choosing to step away from that position was I knew that if I stayed there, like I was going to keep holding that sort of pressure in my
Mhm.
system and that it was going to lead to worse health problems. Like I could sense that that was building. Like and it had already built in
Yeah,
many ways to
yeah,
different climaxes and
yeah,
my
and what
body going into a
yeah. What
crash.
happens to
What was that?
Mhm.
Oh, it kind of cut out.
I cut out? Oh, I was just saying, that is what I was saying earlier on, pressure has the ability, if not controlled, to
Hmm.
burst pipes from
Yeah,
buildup. But if you control that buildup and you direct it, you can create
yeah.
diamonds. So it's simple, but simple's not easy.
Hmm.
So you saw in that moment diamonds weren't being created here. I'm gonna get out before I blow up.
Yeah.
So you made an informed decision by gauging yourself. It was
Well,
amazing.
and one of those tests for myself was actually because I was seeing a doctor and checking in
Mhm.
with him because it's thankfully my leave ended up being covered by FMLA. Um, and so I was checking in with him regularly, and that's every time I would have a doctor's appointment, like I would feel this like release as like time went on with separation from that space, and I was having these like I gave myself a bunch of um, single focus tasks.
Mhm.
They were things I didn't know how to do. I was actually doing just deep cleaning and home renovation projects
Mhm.
because they were things I had to have very finite focus on
Yeah.
to accomplish because I wasn't super familiar with what I was doing. So I couldn't go into this like automatic mode for myself with those
Mhm.
tasks. But I would come up to the point of having another doctor's appointment, and within a day or two before having the doctor's appointment, I would start feeling all that pressure build again in my system. And like ultimately, I had to come to acknowledging, no, this is my body telling me no over and over and over. I need to listen to that.
Yeah. Listening to your body, especially in regards to pressures or stresses, is so important. Not just for your mental health, but your physical health as well. Like, in my case, I find it I personally, and you all can hate on me if you want, but I find it hilarious that as someone with PTSD and who works with people with PTSD, the levels of pressure that I can handle that just seem ridiculous. Like I recently was traveling, and never fly Spirit. Anybody who's listening, just don't do it. It's not worth your time. Don't save the money. But I had a layover in Vegas, and the flight to Vegas got delayed by a couple of hours, and I already knew that I was going to get stuck in Vegas somehow. And so I just mentally prepared myself for all of that. I was like, all right, game plan. So what am I going to do? And I ended up, redirecting my flight to somewhere that was close by to where I lived, but I had somewhere to stay and I figured it out. And then I remember when I was first starting out as a coach, I was having some Zoom issues, and they're simple issues. That technological issue, which apparently was able to fix simply by updating Zoom, sent me into a 2-hour crying frenzy where I was just like, oh my God, I don't know how to handle any of this. Like, oh my God. And yet, being stranded in Vegas, I was like, oh, I guess I can gamble, go have a beer, I'll be fine. It's okay. But I find not putting, I guess, pressure on your pressures helps a lot. Don't try and compare how you handle pressure to how another person handles pressure. And maybe don't's not the right word, but it's not in your best interest.
Well, and even what you're describing, there's like in me thinking back to having recent flights in the last couple years, and especially ones that had connecting flights.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's there's a and I don't know whether to call it an internal stress or pressure. It can be this perceived pressure from outside, but then it's kind of like the amount of stress you decide to take on in your own body.
Mhm.
Um, and just letting go of that control and like that more esoteric knowing that it's all going to work out or trusting the universe or whatever it may be, um, can
Mhm.
definitely help with that space. And again, it's not an easy thing to do. Um, there's a lot that comes up in our society around controlling the world outside of us.
Yeah.
But I think the more focus you can have around controlling what you actually have control over, which is things within yourself, like how you're deciding to perceive this moment,
Mhm.
um, how you're wanting to respond to a situation
Mhm.
is really, really valuable because I know that there was so much more perceived pressure for me from the outside world when I felt like I had any control over it. Um,
Mm.
and that's like there was one point in particular coming back to flights where it was like, okay, I have um like our my son, and this was a couple years ago, so he was 4 at the time. We were flying back from Georgia. We had a connecting flight in Chicago, and our first flight got delayed by a couple hours. I just remember sitting in that airport for so
Mhm.
long and trying to make sure he was entertained, and knowing like we still had a long day. But I did everything I could to try to facilitate, like, okay, like what what do we do if we miss our flight? Is there other flights we can take? Okay,
Mhm.
by what the itinerary is saying, we're going to have 10 minutes from the point in time we land until our next flight closes its doors for boarding. Like,
Yeah.
can we respectively make it? And that I have a toddler and suitcases in tow, like, can I do that through the airport? So, like, I reached out to the airport staff and I was like, "Hey, can I get one of the, like, driving cart things?" Right? To, like, zoom us through the airports because, I mean, I can run through an airport. His legs are a lot smaller, um,
Yes.
and not potentially losing him in a crowd. I'd never been to the Chicago airport. I had no idea what size it was,
Mhm.
for having to move through. But in that space, it was funny because they showed up at um when we were getting off the plane with a wheelchair. And we're like, "Oh, you needed, like, service to your next gate?" And I was like, "No, like, I wanted a car thing so we could go fast," right? And I was short with the girl, and I, like, even apologized in that moment, but I was like, "Him and I have to go, like, I don't have time to sit here and have a conversation about this." And she
Mhm.
ended up, like, chasing us down through the airport, pushing this wheelchair, and she looked at me and she's like, "You can go fast, he can't. Like, let's strap him in the wheelchair and we'll both run." And we ended up making it for our flight. And I think like, it all worked out to where we even got into Portland on time.
Mhm.
And it was a very long day of flight times and everything. But the value point I saw in that feeling of pressure from the outside world was
Yeah.
it allowed me to look at different options, right? Versus,
Yeah.
oh, this is going according to the plan I had initially. That pressure was telling me, okay, you might have to make a different plan. You may need to ask for help.
Yeah.
Versus if I had, like, going into my old pattern of just taking on all the responsibility myself, then all that pressure gets internalized. I'm not taking as many actions in the outside world to adjust that.
Mhm. Yeah. And also, in the instance you're talking about, that was time sensitive pressures. And that's not always the case. So, when pressures, happen, in my case, I have a lot of technological pressures. I've had them in my past, and I continue to have them in my future because I'm just not a tech savvy person.
Well,
Being
and
aware that I don't
okay.
need to do it immediately is helpful. So if you know that there's nothing that can be done right now, but you know if like taking a break and breather and coming back to it is an option, by all means go for it if you have the ability to do that. And obviously in the case of your story, you didn't have that ability, and so you went to what else can I do here to get me to where I need to go?
Yeah. No, I honestly, that's, I mean, I've dealt with many tech issues as well, especially internet deciding to cut out and drop. Um,
Mhm.
I actually have found some very interesting value points that came up with that even through sessions, and it definitely
Mhm.
goes more into the like esoteric and kind of woo-woo sides of
Uh-huh.
interpretation. But like there was some huge value moments, and one of them, I remember this woman I was doing peer trades with,
Mhm.
like we tried setting up calls like two or three times, and this was for her to receive a coaching session. And in that, like it it wasn't even to the point like where I just couldn't see her and it was pixelating out. Like the audio was like so garbled, it
Mhm.
just sounded like some really janky robot. um, but in that, we like, I think it was the third time, we were like, okay, like, do we reschedule this? Do we just not even try again? Like, and we're literally sitting there trying to reschedule this again. And it comes around to where the connection is now clear. And we're like, okay, like we're going to try this again. And it starts clipping out more again. And she ends up making the comment that every time she tries to set aside time for herself to
Mhm.
actually do work, some outside interference comes in to stop her.
Mhm.
And this was the perfect example of that. Like she was the one who was the focus of the client. That's her having this space very distinctly held for herself.
Mhm.
And I mean, she was experiencing that with like her and her partner would go to be intimate, right? And almost immediately the kids would knock on the door.
Oh,
Or her
yeah.
partner was going to just give her a massage. Kids would knock on the door. Mom, I need you. I want you.
Yeah.
And so it ended up leading into having a lot of play with how much she actually like was creating energetic space for herself versus like calling in these distractions.
Mhm.
And so that then became a part of our session space, right? There's always going to be outside distractions. There's always going to be more outside responsibilities and people asking you to do things and whatnot. But it's like how much can you actually like set aside for you? Because it takes a conscious effort.
Yeah.
And then yeah, reframing that like maybe though, or like even though you're not seeing it right in this moment, maybe there is some bigger value point
Mhm.
to what's coming up.
And I love that because, like, in my case, when I got stranded in Vegas, I had been traveling for, a week at that point. I was tired, I wanted to go home. I was missing my family and my partner. Um, However, my partner lives I live in Seattle and my partner lives in Portland.
Mhm.
And I had already been planning to fly into Seattle, get in my car, and drive down to Portland.
Mhm.
And in many ways, my derailment and the pressures of that manifested my desires.
Yeah.
So I found myself, the week after while I was in my boyfriend's apartment, I was thinking about it and I was like, how many things in my life have I not allowed to just happen and manifest in this way because I handled the pressure in a negative way,
Hmm.
or I allowed the pressures to become negatives instead of positives.
Yeah.
And I just, I found myself being like, I don't ever want to question this again. And so I guess I made a pact with myself, and I guess a way that from here on out, like, I'm going to assess the situation in a very, very informed way so that I don't look back, 10 years from now and question how many situations in life that had heavy pressures and stresses on them if I handled them in a way that created my desires.
Hmm.
And I think it's important to that, like, having that viewpoint. Um, and by the way, it's not easy to have. Like, stress is really hard and pressure is really hard. So you have to ground yourself and level yourself a bit. Take some deep breaths. Um, but that it takes away a lot of the weights. Like, I always viewed pressure as having the world on your back and climbing up a mountain.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure that's a Greek story. Was it Atlas?
Probably.
Something like that.
You're
Um,
much more familiar with the Greek stories than I am, so.
yeah. Um, and that is a very beautiful visual depiction of what pressure feels like.
Hmm.
It feels like the world is on your back. So if you're able to, I guess my analogy is coming from someone who's traveled a lot. When pressure is happening in travel scenarios for me, the first thing I always do is take off my backpack. I'm not going to have this conversation with this taxi driver, with this hotel receptionist, or the flight people with a heavy ass backpack on my back. I'm going to take it off. I'm going to keep it in front of me, keep it where I can see it. And that's me already taking away controlled pressures in a pressured scenario that I don't have much control over.
Hmm.
And so being able to acknowledge, or I guess see, what I do have control over in a under pressure can help you handle the pressure that you're under. It's a
Well,
very,
and
it's a very funny statement. It's a lot of words,
I
but
think the thing that keeps coming up, right, over and over again as we've been talking is, um, so like you described in that delay with your Vegas flight and stuff, like you had felt that calling to go to Portland,
hmm
right? And like you were gonna do that whether it was with car, like that situation just actually helped facilitate it in a completely different way where now you didn't have to spend hours driving between Portland and Seattle on
yeah,
top of all your flight time.
yes,
Um, that's with the burnout I experienced, and like there is no way I could have planned the set of. I mean, I possibly could have, but that would have been really elaborate, and it was not worth the mental anguish I put myself through during that phase of burnout. Um, but I think it was not even 6 months, like 3, 4 months before I hit or started going into this burnout cycle really bad. I had actually created my first manifestation board, and
hmm
it was part of the courses I was doing at the time. And I was like, okay, like I want to call in $300,000 by the end of a year. And I did this through a sex magic practice, and I was like, worst thing happens, nothing happens, right? Like that's the worst outcome. Like it's not something like that has to happen for me to keep existing,
Right.
right? But in that, I remember the next day, like after I had done this practice, being like, oh God, if I'm going to call in $300,000, my house is going to have to burn down. Like, I'm not going to be able to like bring in that amount of money through the work I'm doing or anything else. Like, is my house now going to burn down? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
um, but then I went into burnout a few months later, and it led to this space where like for a few months I was having Mondays off of work, right? And
Mhm.
then it turned into I got 4.5 months paid off of work. Well, in that 4.5 months, like I mentioned before, I started doing deep cleaning projects and just little renovation projects because they gave me single focused tasks.
Mhm.
Because I knew if I
Yeah,
just sat there that I was going to stay in my head and drive myself crazy.
exactly. Yeah.
And so through all of this, like I was just trying to clean up my space because I know when I clean up my space, I feel better
That
mentally as well. But through that, it like came around to me working with this therapist, and I was talking about like the stress I was feeling around going back to work when these doctor's appointments were coming up. And he dropped the bomb and he's like, "Well, you could sell your house." And I was like, What?" And all the initial like I can'ts came up.
Mhm.
But by that point in time, I had learned or taught myself when I hear that I can't, like question those. Like, why is that not something you can do?
Mhm.
And it ended up turning into this thing where I sold my house. Like, and it wasn't an easy decision to come to, especially leaving this perceived safety and security of
Yeah.
that corporate job. Um, but the whole intention of the 300,000 was because I wanted to be out of debt on my house, and I wanted to give myself a pool of money so I could support my son and myself for 2 to 3 years without having to work a corporate job, so I could build out my coaching or business.
Yeah.
And like even when I like initially met with my realtor, she's like, "Oh, we might be able to get 250,000 for this." And it ended up selling for 290.
Nice.
And like also like very shortly around the time where I hit burnout, I'd also just been randomly given a chunk of money, which I had never been given a chunk of money like that.
Yeah.
Um previously. But in all those things, like it came down to it, and it was almost exactly a year from the point like I had done that sex magic practice and set that intention of what I wanted to call in life to the point of like I closed on my house. It had to have been within a couple weeks for the time span um,
Mhm.
of being like exactly a year. But with that, like having this level of like consciousness about what it is you're wanting to call in. And that's where allowing yourself to play with your manifestations, even if you don't think they can happen, can be really valuable, and can help you let go of control. Because even in that initial goal of like $300,000, like there was a part of me that was like, I have to make this happen because otherwise my house is burning down.
Yeah.
And my house burned down in very like uh, non-literal senses,
Oh, goodness.
right? Well, because like
Oh,
it
non-literal. Sorry,
yeah,
I heard
non-literal. It
literal.
didn't physically burn down. No, non-literal. I couldn't think of
Yes,
the correct word, so I went with the
operative word there.
yeah.
Yes, I understand.
Um but like it did. My house even had like it was like its own like phoenix burning
Oh,
experience.
definitely. Yeah.
And it was interesting because it was very easy for me to be like, or my realtor kept asking me like, "Are you sure you want to sell? You don't just want to keep it? Like you have done so much work to this place." The house literally had become what I had wanted it to become the entire time I owned it. And
Mhm.
like now it was like that perfect space, and now I was like, "Okay, no, like it's for somebody else."
Yeah.
And I need to go on with this next part of my journey. But there's a level of consciousness to it, and that's as I got closer to the end of that, it was so much easier to let go of like those other pressures that could be there or feel like they're there,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
When I was clear on what my intentions were, and once again
Yes.
allowing that trust in myself, allowing that trust in universe, God, source, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And believe me, that even coming to that was not an easy juncture in my life. I was very good at needing to be in control all the time,
Mhm.
and let alone like I was very atheistic, like all through high school. It probably wasn't until about 6 years ago where I actually allowed myself to define any sort of spirituality at all. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, being able to let go of control is is huge in releasing the way we're perceiving those pressures as well.
Yeah. And I do wanna say just, in the PTSD space, there is a structure to letting go of control. And I say
Mhm,
this because, before I, got my degree and became a coach, I went through to fly back and I had told myself on the plane, I'm going to go back to grad school. Or I'm going to not back. I'm going to go to grad school and I'm going to, help other women who are going through the same thing that I'm going through. Um so that they don't have to do it alone like I'm doing it. And when I got back, I allowed myself to relax and I let go of control. And it was okay in the beginning until it wasn't. But that
mhm,
that I ended up releasing pressure, but pressure was still pouring out. The gases were still coming out. So like one, let's say, like the gas tanks are leaking and I'm not paying attention to it and I'm ignoring it. And at any time, if I flip a match or a lighter, everything's gonna blow up because I've let go of control in a non-constructive, informed way, and that is what
mhm,
ended up happening to me. And there were other factors involved in that. There were other pressures, is a good way to put it. I wasn't handling things in the a way that pleased people around me. I was under that pressure of like, oh, you need to handle this way, and I'm like, I don't need to do anything. This is not a scenario you understand. Um, and that led me to losing control to where I was blacking out in bathtubs from drinking, straight out of the bottle to handle my
mhm,
situation. I was still looking for schools to go to. I was still doing that, but I had let go of control and everything else. And so there is a balance to, how much you let go of the reins. You don't want to let go of them completely and let the horse go willy nilly. And you don't want to hold on to them too much so you piss off the horse and you get bucked off. Um, I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but understanding pressure and the control that you have around it, it helps you make sense of the world around you, what's happening in your world and your being around you in that moment, and it makes you capable of making informed decisions around that. So
Mhm.
my warning is don't view letting go or losing, allowing letting go of control to be too literal.
Yeah, no, it's always a
Yes,
balance,
yes, exactly.
right? And that's where I find the value in recognizing where you have
Yeah.
control to be of the highest value. Like that's um coming back to things with my divorce and when I was going through that space.
Mhm.
There was so much of me just wanting to be heard and
Mhm.
understood. Like I didn't need my ex-husband to agree with me, right? But I felt like I needed him to hear me and understand me.
Mhm.
Um, and needing to come to a place of acceptance within myself that he may not be at a place where he can't. And he, like, in that moment where he may never be able to.
Yeah.
And then, but that gave me the opportunity to have compassion for myself in those spaces,
Mhm.
recognize what my need under that was, where I could fulfill that or connect with other friends or activities, whatever it was, to get those needs fulfilled.
Yeah.
That it didn't need to be me controlling this other person's perception of me.
Mhm. Yeah.
And to me, like, that's that nuanced difference in that space. And
Definitely.
that came down to if he started going into name calling, right?
Mhm.
Me not trying to make him stop name calling, because if he wants to name call, he's going to name call. But I cannot engage with it. And I can set my standard of how I interact with people, right? And how I allow myself to be treated. If he wants to name call, cool, but I don't need to sit on the other end of the phone or stand in front of him and take it.
Mhm.
I can move away from that. And I also don't have to take it personally. Like that is very much his own stuff, his own patterns of how he learned to interact with the world. And I don't have to meet him at his level. I don't need to start name calling him. Like even there was points even during our relationship where I should have taken it as a very big red flag, but he would get mad at me because we wouldn't get into like full blown fights where we were name calling each other because that's what he was used to.
Mhm.
He would tell me there was something wrong with me because I was willing to sit down and talk
Mhm.
about what was coming up.
Yeah.
But my guess is that was too emotionally vulnerable for him, and that's okay. Like, but I should have taken that at that point for myself as like, this isn't a good match. I didn't. I stayed and I got to learn my lessons very well over
Mhm.
through that space.
Yeah. And I've been there too. I definitely like to say, listen to the universe when it whispers. Don't wait around for it to scream. I've learned my lesson.
Same with your body.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Definitely. That's
And that's where we're going into the somatics work, learning
Mhm.
to listen to what your emotions are saying
Yeah.
is so very, very valuable because they do carry very potent messages. And even when it feels like this like overwhelming pressure from the outside world, that is a message that your body is trying to give you. Like there's probably sensations coming up in your body or like and rising of emotions and stuff like that that's trying to tell you a message And it's getting down to where you learn how to have a conversation and communicate
Mhm.
with your own body. And the more you can do that, the easier it is to create those spaces of understanding in yourself, understand where other people are at,
Mhm.
and to just create those spaces of connection, like, because you are genuinely starting to connect within yourself.
Mhm.
Like when you're doing that, when you're listening to yourself, it's so much easier to actually listen to other people. Like I don't necessarily like the saying of like you can't really love anybody until you love yourself, but there is truth in it,
Yes.
right? You can't really listen to anybody else until you're listening to yourself. Like it applies across the board. If you feel like you can listen to other people but you can't listen to yourself, or you can love other people but you can't love yourself, like there's internal work
Mhm.
to be done there. But to me that shows that like it shows you you have the capability of loving, right? It shows you you have the capability of listening.
Yeah.
But like if you don't see that you can bring that to yourself, like
Mhm.
what's there for you?
Yeah, and I highly urge people to practice that within themselves and not externally.
Hmm.
Obviously, you will eventually, but not the other way around to begin with. Start with yourself and then work outward.
Well, and if you're going to, like, let's say you're in a relationship where like you're recognizing like your guys' communication skills could be significantly better,
Mhm.
like start doing research for yourself. Again, hire a coach, like find other sources of information,
Mhm.
and even outside your friend and family group, because our friends and family group are a lot of the places we learned certain patterns and behaviors for how to interact with the world. So like start looking to people who are experts in their field,
Yeah.
right? There's a great book on communication. It's called, I think it's called Critical Conversations. Um, Another one is nonviolent communication. I have some wary spots with that because that concept, it can work really well if the other person you're communicating with is also practicing those things.
Mhm.
If they're not, it can also lead to very toxic spaces where you end up taking on a lot of abuse and not setting healthy boundaries. But there's starting places for everyone, and those are going to look different for each person. And the bigger thing is if you're feeling that draw, like, and something in you is recognizing like I need to work on communication, start looking into communication. If it's like I really want to understand relationship dynamics, look into that. Like follow those things you're called for. If it's I haven't really believed in tarot, but like I keep feeling drawn to it,
Mhm.
look into that.
Yes.
Like explore those different avenues because there's probably something in that for you.
Yes. And it might even be learning that there isn't.
Yeah.
And you got that knowledge now, and you now know it wasn't exactly what you were looking for, but you're still the better for knowing what you know now.
Hmm.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah. No, and that's once again, it's coming back to like controlling what you can.
Mhm. Exactly.
Because I would say a lot of that outside pressure, which there is going to be those outside pressures around you all the time. There's going to be people asking you on dates that you don't want to go on,
Mhm.
right? There's going to be people who you say no to, and they keep
Yeah.
asking for the same thing over and over and over again, even though it's still a no for you.
Yeah. They're gonna
Like, that is a type
Yeah,
of
yeah,
pressure that somebody else is trying to put on you. You don't have to take it on.
exactly. And the same goes to, all of the women that I work with who have been in domestic abuse or narcissistic relationships, that hoovering, them messaging you, you've blocked them, you've cut them off, you've done this, that, and whatnot, and they still persisting. Exactly what Alice
Mhm.
just said still, you know, applies to that scenario. Like, you don't have to show up for that.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, for people wanting to explore relationships, and that this course is more specifically aimed at women.
Mhm.
But I have a course called Conscious AF Dating, so conscious as fuck dating, and it's really about coming back to this core of self-love
Mhm.
and then building out from there. And
Yeah.
there are huge pieces in that that are also around establishing, like, what is it that you really want, not what society tells you you should want, not what a partner tells you what you should want. Like, coming to, like, setting your standards, knowing what, like, your needs are, what your red flags are, what your, like, those delicious, like, extra bonuses are,
Mhm.
and, like, working around that frame to then position yourself to, like, you know how to get your needs fulfilled,
Yes.
whether you have a partner or not. And then when you have that, it's interesting. It kind of flows in.
Mhm.
Um, and it can be scary, right? But it can also be this really, really beautiful experience. And that's even in my current relationship, like, this is like the most loving and doting partner I have probably ever had. Quentin is phenomenal, and he has gotten to hold me in many spaces because I feel uncomfortable actually accepting that amount of love from somebody
Mhm.
else, or feeling that I'm even worthy of it
Yes. Yeah.
because of my old narratives. And so having somebody who is so loving, like, he will serenade me,
Aw.
which as a little kid, like, I remember, like, fantasizing about, but, like, as an adult, I've never thought that was actually possible for me,
Mhm.
right? But in my own journey of going through that course, it wasn't, or in, like, going through the work for this course, because anything I offer, I have done that work extensively myself as well. But as I went through that, like, I wanted a partner who was willing to, like, shout their love for me from the rooftops.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
was one of my things. Like, I did not want to be somebody's little secret.
Yep.
And so, like, in that, I have that. Like, he's very good at that, and sometimes it feels embarrassing. But I've also, like, gotten to notice those feelings of embarrassment and, like, told him, like, I feel uncomfortable with this, but I don't want you to stop. Or could we back off just a little bit, because it feels like too much in my system,
Yeah.
and whatever else it is. And that it's working with edges.
Yes. That's a beautiful way to put it. I love that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like working with edges.
Yes. Well, I do unfortunately have to hop off. My
Yes.
time has reached its peak. But anyone listening, you are able to find all our links below. I do run a Facebook group as well as a coaching program for women with PTSD or have gone through narcissistic or domestic violence, and helping them love themselves and recreate their lives. So if you're interested in that, feel free to click the link.
Yes, and next Thursday we will be back with a recorded session, which I'm really excited about, and it's called Playing in the Shadows. So we're going to be talking about shadow work,
Mm,
and that can feel like a very sticky, mucky, scary place that we don't want to explore, but it can also be the most fun, um, brilliant, and illuminating space you play in.
definitely.
So please, please join us next week as well.
Definitely.
All right. Well, have a fantastic
Thank
day,
you. You as well.
and we'll talk to you next
Mm-hmm.
week.
Bright and early.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.